My name is Peter Leonard. I'm the Acting Dean and Canon Chancellor here at Portsmouth Cathedral. One of the real privileges of working in a building like this is the fact that it stood here for over 800 years. So in terms of marking the passing of time, there have been an incredible amount of things that have happened within the building and around it. There are incredible pictures of this building over the many, many centuries that it's been stood here, with all sorts of differences. Being the Cathedral of the Sea, it's also had this role of ships coming in and looking towards this tower that we are stood in, with the lantern at the top, lit up particularly at night and in the fog to guide them in. So something about solidity and being here when it is needed, not just for ships arriving, but for weddings and funerals and baptisms, for sailors who used to have to receive Holy Communion before they went on board ship, and they used to have a card which was stamped before they were allowed on board. So there's a real sense of this being here and being permanent and serving a purpose.
I'm a criminal defence barrister, and for us time is uniquely important, both the past and the future, and what is said in the present in a courtroom. In terms of my own timescale, I didn't become a barrister until I was 41. For 20 years or so before that I was an actor, but some say it's just the same job, I'm telling stories. But the jury can't leave at half time. It's a good profession in as much as, like many of my colleagues here, the older you are and the more experienced you are, the better you're likely to be at the job, unlike a lot of other young thrusting professions where you're over the hill at 25 or 30. Now, as I said, the past is important because in a courtroom we delve back into the past. We examine what really happened on that day, 6, 8, 12, 24 months ago, and what you say about it now. We also have one eye on the future. How much time is my guy going to get if he's convicted? The last murder trial I did, he was convicted and he got 30 years. He was 40 years of age when he was sentenced, so he'll be 70 before he's even considered for parole. That's a lot of time in a small space.
My name is Marie Costa. I came to England in the 1950s, late 1950s, and I lived in Blackburn, Lancashire. I've travelled around the country, studied nursing, midwifery, worked in many hospitals in the community and everywhere. I arrived in Portsmouth in the 1960s, where time has changed my experiences before in the north of England. I've met many people, have changed my ideas of people, and have been involved in many things in the community.
I'm a senior research fellow at Solent University. I specialise in maritime and marine environment. I have a remit to teach students on these courses, and I've had many interesting projects. Time at the university is marked by students joining in their first year and then leaving 3 years later, hopefully with a degree, and this is marked by graduation. Some students return to the university and share their experience with us and tell us about their jobs and places of employment. In this way, time moves in a cyclical process and throughout the university life. I live in Southsea and I have a connection with the sea. We have the sea around us here all the time, and the constant flow of leisure craft and ships going out into Solent is a constant source of interest. The movement of time for me is marked by the ebb and flow of the tides, and I have a tide clock that personally marks that for me.
I'm a monster theorist and cultural historian at the University of Portsmouth. My research enables me to think about time in two very unique ways. As someone who studies monster narratives, we're taught to believe that monsters are a product of cultural anxieties at a certain point in time. I look at 19th century narratives in particular, possibly about urbanisation, revolution. But the truth is that monsters are perennial. They occur across time, across cultures, all over the world. One of the oldest monsters is the Humbaba from the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example. But you can still find environmental issues embedded in this text that relate to anxieties about the cedar forest the Humbaba exists in.
I'm Stephen Morgan. I'm born and bred in Portsmouth and lived in this city all my life. It's where my grandfather left Southsea on his 17th birthday for Operation Overlord, where my parents worked in public services and where I went to local school. It's a fantastic city to represent. I got elected as a Member of Parliament for the Labour Party in June 2017, the first representative of that party in our constituency's history. And since then, I've been busy using my time standing up for Portsmouth in Parliament, making sure that our schools get the resources that they need and our NHS is cared for, that our veterans get support from government and that our Royal Navy is secure in our nation's history and future. I'm proud to represent this city as someone that's born and bred in the city, and I'll be working hard in Parliament to make sure our city gets a fairer deal.
I'm Adam Peters. I'm a professional mariner. First of all, I spent 30 years of my life in the Royal Navy, serving everything from submarines, both conventional and nuclear, to the Antarctic patrol ship, fire destroyers and fast patrol boats. I was very fortunate to visit every single continent and sail every single ocean. After retiring, I then got involved in the sailing industry for both pleasure and for reward. And latterly, I've been involved with the Sea Cadets training the next generation of young people to go to sea. Time has always been important, whether it's in the running of the ship and the watch system employed on those, or just measuring the time that one's been away from home and when one's likely to be back after a 6-7 month deployment. Time is always important at sea.
I'm an actor and a director for the theatre. And I have to go back a long time to find the roots of where that interest first grew. I think really not so much of the nativity plays at school or the Simple Simon that was my, I think, a startling debut, but actually pretending out in the fields as kids. Cowboys and Indians, that sort of thing. And it was a sense that if you imagined hard enough, it was very easy to feel that actually it was real. We weren't playing. We actually were those men. And I think it's getting in touch with that sense of reality, the recreation of moments, that really continues to fascinate me right to this day.
There's a great story related to St. Augustine, that he was walking along a beach one day and saw someone who had dug a hole, and this person was going down to the sea, collecting water and bringing it back and putting it in the hole. And St. Augustine says to the man, "What are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm trying to get the entire sea into this hole." And St. Augustine says, "Well, you're never going to be able to do that." And the man then turned and said, "And neither will you ever be fully able to understand who and what God is," and then vanishes. I really like that, because as a priest, I'm very aware that God is beyond my understanding. The more I learn about God and my faith, the more I realise I don't know. And actually my faith is about living with and managing questions rather than finding answers. God sits outside of time, and that's a mind-blowing concept. I can't even begin to get my head around that. But it's also quite comforting that here I am, trapped in time, if you like, constrained by it, and yet there is a being, a divine being, who is beyond that, because that divine being somehow created it. It offers me some reassurance, and it's what enables me to do some of the harder parts of my job. Dealing with people in distress, funerals, that somehow there is something which is bigger and beyond time, and time is only a temporary limitation which is imposed upon us now, but which at some point will be lifted, and we will be able to go and be beyond time to that place that God is. But God, of course, has also stepped into time, and that's the whole Jesus thing, that God chose to be human and step into time to understand what it is to be human, with all the good bits and the bad bits. So that's what enables me to cope with being in time, as well as looking forward to being outside it.
As barristers, we sometimes cruelly exploit time for our purposes at trial. The outcome of a trial depends on the evidence given by a witness, and it's normally oral. The witness goes into the witness box in front of all those people, the judge, the barristers, the people in the public gallery, the staff, and gives their recollection of that awful event years or months ago. And we try to exploit the passage of time in order to undermine her recollection, if that's what our purpose is. And we say, is that really what you thought at the time? Is that what you saw? Or is that how you remember it now? Is that how you think you ought to remember it? Or did you say something different at the time in your statement? We seek to suggest and exploit discrepancies between now and then. And it's not easy for the witness. They're vulnerable, and we weaponise time. We use the passage of time as a stick with which to beat the witness if her narrative doesn't suit our purpose in that trial. It's cruel, but it's part of what we're trying to achieve.
Time is a funny thing in nursing and midwifery and teaching. When I was training as a nurse midwife, there was a strict hierarchy where everybody is respected and given respect according to your station in life. And if you came into the hospital ward, you would know who is a trained nurse, who is a sister, who is the junior doctor, who is the registrar, and the God, who is the consultant. And everybody respected everybody, and we worked quite happily, I think, out of fear sometimes, because you could not disrespect your senior. Today, of course, things have changed. In the hospital, you can't tell who is a trained nurse, who is a doctor, who is a sister, who's in charge, because everyone says, oh, this patient is not mine, and you can't find out who is. The patients were quite well looked after, I would say, in both era. But my time, we felt that patients were better looked after, but that's probably in hindsight. Today, the IT system has taken over the looking after of patients. In those days, we used to rub people's bottoms, their backs, to make them more comfortable. Today, there's no such thing. And no one seems to care too much about the basic nursing care, which is feeding and giving people comfort and love and a hug, which helps.
My professional link to time is about how we use the sea. It's about my involvement with people who work with the sea and use the sea for a living. It's about the changes in the marine environment that we've been seeing in recent years. There's an ongoing process of sea level rise and then ice ages that have been repeated over time. And we're currently experiencing a massive meltback of the ice caps, and sea level rise is once again on the increase. We are getting frightening statistics almost on a weekly basis. Added to that, over time, population increase has grown exponentially, and we are placing a huge pressure on the marine environment. This is going to cause a big problem if we don't look at that in the future and more specifically take action right now. More in the maritime, we also have a nautical time as a concept, and you will get a captain changing the time on the ship as they take a passage from A to B across the world, just as we would change our watch when we've been on a long haul flight. So my sense of time professionally is about the cycles of nature and the rapid increase of human population, which has been growing out of control in recent years. And it's about nautical time and its impact on humans.
I'm a musician. I'm a bass player. To us, time is something that we keep. It's something that we manipulate. We use time as a way to make you dance. We can use it as a way to make you cry, to feel. How fast we decide to push the beat, how slow we decide to pull it back. One thing I think is essential as a musician is understanding individual time versus collective time in a band. You can have your own metronomic sense of time as a bass player or any other musician, but if you don't adhere to the collective time of the band, your band won't be in time and people won't dance.
A week is a long time in politics. That's what Harold Wilson once said. And what I've learnt is that everyone has a view on how I use my time. I've got to get the balance between working in Parliament and in my constituency, serving everyone that I represent. And that's a real challenge, because I've got to get a balance between helping people around school funding, around the NHS, on parking, on all those issues that matter to people. People want a piece of my time. And what I've learnt is it's vitally important that you have time to think, to reflect, think about the future and what that means in terms of the work that you do. And ultimately, time to yourself to reflect on the situation that you're in and make sure you're doing the job effectively. Because ultimately, you can be busy but not effective in the use of your time.
Time, as I said, is hugely important at sea. A warship or any ship has to get from A to B, it has to be manned 24 hours a day. And we have a watch system, which is a shift system, but we call them watches, again relating to time, that make sure the ship is manned for the appropriate task in hand. Merchant vessels will keep watches for a passage going from A to B. Warships, if they're just in passage routine, from A to B, but other times of increased threat, then they'll go to a different watch system, which means that they're much better manned for any threat that may come to them. Time, of course, is also important when it comes to navigation. If you leave the harbour at the wrong time, the tide will not be right, and as we know, time and tide wait for no man, and certainly no ship. I have run a ship aground going out of a harbour at the wrong time. Enough said on that one. And, of course, time is hugely important to the sentimental souls that are seagoing folk, and therefore the time seems to extend itself when you are missing your home, missing your family, missing your children, but also when you're looking forward to the next opportunity to go ashore and create just your own little bit of mayhem after 4 or 5 months of hard work.
Time is a magnificently significant element in the theatre. Firstly, because, of course, in preparing something in rehearsal, time is finite. And a play lasting an hour, 60 minutes, could take 60 hours of rehearsal time to actually produce the final product. So when people see the final product, they may not be aware of just how much time and man hours and woman hours are packed into those 60 minutes. And in plays themselves, of course, we play with time. Sometimes we might pack 10, 20 or 30 years into an hour's play. Sometimes we play around with time. Harold Pinter's play Betrayal starts at the end, effectively, chronologically, and works its way through the play back to the beginning in time terms. We can also, of course, in immersive theatre, we can actually live through time in real time. So the time it takes to experience is exactly the time of the play.
People associate the past with churches, partly because of the buildings and they've been here a long time. But I think there's also something about the fact that on a daily basis, stories are told in the building from the past. From the distant past, Bible readings talk about things that have happened and stories which were written a long, long time ago. And then of course there's the more recent past with memorials and other events. But it's not a dead past, it's not something which is trapped in the past. They are read and they are remembered so that we can think about what they might mean and how they might apply to us today. Both in terms of it's good to remember, but also in terms of what does it mean for how we live? What does it mean for how we can make the world a better place? What does it mean for our faith? What our faith means to us and the impact it has on our lives. So churches are very historical in many, many ways, but they're also really contemporary if they're done well and if they are applied rather than just something which is nice to do because it is something that is traditional and we've always done. They need to be a living tradition, not something which is dead. And that's really important to me as a priest, that people come in and see the relevance of what happens within this space.
I have a cosy, comfortable vision of how time was felt and experienced and measured in the past. For thousands of years, time was measured by the passage of the sun each day or by the changing face of the moon each night, and the seasons. And nothing much changed until about 250 years ago with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. The means of production, once manual, became mechanised and manufactories were established and production lines, but they had to work to time. And it was no use the workers just turning up when they were available. They had to start at the same time in shifts, so time was enforced upon them. And then about 200 years ago, when the railways became established, things got really serious. There were timetables. It was no use having a train that departed at 12:15 if nobody knew when 12:15 was. The businesses needed the customers, so clocks became commonplace. Except in factories, where clocks were not allowed. The workers were reliant upon the boss to tell them when their shift was ended, and he wasn't always accurate or fair. And it's said that when you retire and are given a gold watch or a gold chain, that's symptomatic of the fact that you're finally back in control of your own time.
Time is so different and difficult to measure in the professions I've been in nursing, midwifery, teaching. Years ago when I was a young nurse, I'm not old just now, but I was younger, we had to be on duty on the wards half an hour before the change of time for handover so that the people going off can go off on time. When you've finished your work, or when you're nearly finished and something happens, you cannot just walk away. You have to stay and finish whatever it is you're doing before you left. There was no question of overtime. That did not exist. And certainly on public and bank holidays, it's the same pay you get, and so you had to go to work. And I remember delivering a baby after a night shift, and that baby unfortunately was being delivered right 5-10 minutes before I was due off, and I could not leave the woman. And it was nearly 1 hour past the time I should have left that I left, because having delivered, you have to write up your notes, clean up the baby and mother before you left. In teaching, it was the same. You had to come on duty to your staff room half an hour at least before you started, because you needed to collect your time and yourself before you went to the classroom. These days, of course, people have cars and they come to work late and they blame the roads. In those days, we had no cars. You walked or you used the bus. So there's no question of using time as an excuse. So time is very difficult to measure as society changes, because everything changes with it.
I have measured time in the sense of milestones, countries lived in, jobs, relationships, having a child. These are milestones set out the markers of my life and the memories that are formed from them. Everyone has experiences and milestones. They are a measure of where we have come from, where we have arrived at, and they shape and provide the blueprint for our future. There's a sense that anything is possible in time. In the past, we could feel that time is almost unlimited and we have a lot of potential. There's less urgency about time, and things that we think might happen have endless possibilities. Time in the past seemed to be slower, and certainly the pace of life was, and we have longer and more potential. Options in terms of careers and relationships, anything seems possible. A sense of time in youth provides a sense of freedom and the way we think about these possibilities for ourselves. And it's a question of making sure that we use that time wisely, but without realising that we have to do that at the time.
When I was an undergraduate student at the University of Portsmouth in history, I found a book in the library that completely changed my understanding of time. And it was a book by David Lowenthal, and it was called The Past is a Foreign Country. And he took that line from an L.P. Hartley novel. And the full line is, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." And what David Lowenthal was trying to say, or the question that he was asking is, are people in the past so alien to us that it is almost as if we are visiting a foreign country, an alien place, when we study the past? I happen to believe that after studying maybe 10,000 Victorian news reports, that I have some understanding, but certainly I don't know what it means to be a Victorian. And yet I can't help but feel that we have this innate human connection that makes us all the same, that our wants and needs and desires are universal throughout time.
Many of the ways that Parliament works, I think, are from a time gone by. The way that we vote, the bell rings and you've got 8 minutes to get to the division lobby and 15 minutes to vote. The way that it works is that back in the day, people came from the City of London to be an MP as a hobby. Times are changing, and I think we need to reflect that in the way that Parliament reforms. That's so important to make sure that our democracy is fit for purpose for the 21st century.
Humankind have been going to sea for many, many years. Since prehistory, people have gone to sea in all sorts of craft. In the early days, it was all a matter of the time of day, measured by the sun, measured by the moon, or whatever. But as they started exploring broader oceans and trying to get elsewhere and trying to navigate, time became increasingly important. But accurate navigation, without the means for an accurate means of telling the time, was a bit of a difficult thing to establish. We've all heard of the book Longitude, if not read it, and that was really showed the fact that it wasn't until the chronometer was invented that we could accurately navigate across the oceans. There are wonderful stories of the early days before accurate navigation of ships missing out to port entirely and a whole English fleet running aground on the Scilly Isles because they were a lot further north than they thought they were. Time is the essence of decent navigation, so measuring time in the past was very important. Even when I joined the Navy, we had a little thing called the deck watch, which we had to wind daily and keep an error log on it so we knew what the errors were, otherwise we could not satisfactorily navigate from the stars or the sun. As things have progressed, time is easier to measure, but it is still incredibly important to navigation.
Time and the past tend to loom pretty large in dramas. So many characters, as real people are, of course, are formed, shaped, guided, damaged, scarred by memory. And memories are the only flotsam and jetsam, I suppose, that time really leaves behind inside our heads. All that time we spent, all that time we lived, all all that time we played and sang and worked and ate and sat doing nothing. And what do we have to show for it?
I should have been Doctor Who. All my friends and my family and congregation members have heard that from me a number of times. They always laugh, and I said, no, seriously, I'd make a great Doctor Who. All that running around and dealing with timey-wimey stuff is right up my alley. I think there's something quite priest-like about the character Doctor Who. Someone who travels with others into the past and into the future and deals with what's going on in the present. There's something very priestly about that. Plus all those gadgets, sonic screwdriver, who wouldn't want one of those? But the Christian faith, in addition to the past that I've talked about, in addition to being in the present, there's also something about the future. And the Bible talks to us about a time when there will be no more mourning and no more crying and no more pain. But that isn't some magic thing which is just going to happen. It's about us who are here in the present. How are we going to make that happen? What are we going to do to make that happen, to bring about that time when people won't be hungry, when there will be justice for all, when everyone will be included? It's probably still a long way off. There is some progress, and then other days you think we're slipping backwards. But it's about not giving up, because the promise that God gives us is that that is possible. And we should all be aiming for it. And it's not about climbing into a TARDIS. It's not about travelling through a vortex. It's about doing stuff here and now, individually and corporately, which will make that difference to people's lives.
I recall when I was a kid growing up, there'd often be TV programmes about the problems that would face us in the near future when robots would do all the jobs. The amount of leisure time we were going to have was going to be a problem. How on earth were we going to fill all that leisure time? There were dozens of programmes about it, but it hasn't actually worked out quite like that. It seems that from the earliest days of industrialisation, the railways, the timetables, the importance of being somewhere at a particular time, we have lost control of time. And it is no longer our own. It is said that many workers in these days, in, say, large warehouses, the world's largest retailer springs to mind, are electronically monitored by their employers, who can glean exactly how many parcels they've lifted in that hour, how many steps they've taken, how much time they've spent going to the toilet. So the time is no longer our own, it's been taken from us, and it's measured infinitesimally in order to extract the maximum profit from each of those workers. My mum used to quote her dad, who used to say, "What's your hurry? There's all the time in the world. And then there's eternity." But I'm not sure that that's how it still feels.
As a black African British person, I've come to accept that the British, the Northern Europeans, are bound by timekeeping. Everyone lives by their watches. Are you late for something? Even if you're 5 minutes late, it's late. Africans don't take any notice of time. They can tell you they're coming to their house in, say 2 o'clock. You're lucky if they arrive at 3. And they'll grip you, embrace you, and greet you with a smile, and all is forgiven. Why is time so important to some people and not others? And will this change the Africans? To my mind, I don't think it will change them. They're used to time being late, and that means nothing. Why are you hurrying? You give yourself a heart attack, so why bother? Relax and enjoy yourself. Give me a hug, Ma, and they bend over to greet you as a junior, and therefore all is forgiven. In many ways, I agree with them that we are so wound up by being somewhere on time. School, work, leisure. We forget that life isn't about time. It's about being with people you like, working, being wherever you want to be, and doing whatever you enjoy doing. Let's forget about being on time, always planning the next time you have to be somewhere, the tube you have to catch, the bus you have to catch, the driving. Oh, why are the cars so stuck on the motorway? Time. What do we get? High blood pressure, heart attack. Now let's rejoice and be happy that we are marching on time. Don't worry about time.
When I think about time in the future, it's clear that there is less time now. There are not so many years ahead anymore. Time is less, yet time has appeared to speed up. The years just fly by these days, and no longer you've taken the Christmas tree out, then you're putting it away again. Less time to do anything, and this apparent speed of time passing by. So time is not a luxury that it used to be. We need to be more focused and active than ever, and more than ever make the most of the time that is there, particularly as none of us happen to know exactly how much time that is remaining for us. In the maritime environment, there's a sense of the sea being timeless. It's always been there, as far as we know, and when we think about protecting the maritime environment, the time to act is now. In fact, it should have happened already, but we are running out of time to do anything constructive and to help the environment. So time is more important the faster it speeds up and the closer we get to running out of time.
As a PhD candidate, time can seem like it's against you. The closer and closer that you get to submission, the faster time seems to speed up. And one thing that I've found an enormous comfort while studying for my history PhD are memories from when I studied astrophysics and cosmology many years ago, and the way in which we think about time as scientists as relative. When I would feel stressed about my own life, I can think to the age of the universe. I think of the billions of years that it's been around, and I think about its future. I think about the fact that the universe is expanding exponentially, and I think about how amazing it is that we even know that. And so, as I move towards completion, I try to remember that for most people doing PhDs, it can be the best of times, it can be the worst of times. I would like to think that the most important lesson is to make the most of the time that you have.
The pace of life is changing every single day, with social media 24 hours a day, news reports constantly. You've got to react to things instantly, and often that means you haven't got time to reflect and think, and everyone wants to have your say and have your view on a matter. And as someone that believes that they want to make this city a better place, I've got to make sure I can control my time, to make sure I'm prioritising the things that I want to do to make people's lives different. And that means making sure I'm going to the right meetings, going to the right debates, sending the right letters to people so that we can use time effectively to bring about change. And ultimately, I will be judged on how I use my time.
In the future, time at sea will continue to be important. The ships will have to be run to a routine, and that routine is dictated by time. Time is still important from the point of view of navigation, of making sure you get the right place at the right time in accordance with the prevailing tidal conditions, wind conditions, or whatever else. And that's going to remain the same until such time as warships and merchant vessels are manned by robots, in which case there's a whole different ethical argument, and we won't worry about that. Time does dictate what one does. I was taught in the Navy, always be 5 minutes early, and I continue to do that regardless of the pressure that gives me.
Time in the future. Well, we all know how much time we've already had, and we know what time we have here and now, but none of us know how much time we've got left in the bank. And so I find increasingly I'm becoming aware of keeping hold of moments, of enjoying moments. I think my favourite quote from any piece of theatre about time comes from a favourite play, Waiting for Godot, in itself a marvellous disquisition about time and how to pass it. And at one point, following a series of banters, jokes, fallings out, stuff and nonsense, one of the famous pair of tramps, so-called, says to the other, "Well, that passed the time." And the response of the second is to say, "It would have passed in any case." That's life.